Hi, everyone. This is Jay Rosenzweig, the founder and CEO of BirthParentFinder.com. And today I have on with me Tarcia Smith, who is an adoptee, and she is the founder of a fairly new podcast called the Adoption Journey Podcast. And she's also a certified holistic health coach and a certified extreme hip hop instructor. Now, I did some spying on you, and I saw some of
Good.
your hip hop videos, and you are amazing what you do, and I don't think I could do that. But
Oh,
welcome,
thank you.
Patricia.
Thank you
Welcome,
so much.
welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
And I understand this is the first time that you've been on someone else's podcast.
Yes, it is.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, and I'm going to be on yours shortly also, and
Yes, you are.
I can't wait for that. Now, I found you, and we found each other through social media. We
Mhm.
follow each other on Instagram, and I watched your podcast, the first three especially, about your journey looking for your birth family.
Yes.
And the best thing is that you are well adjusted. You had a great upbringing. You had great adopted parents who raised you well, and that's always the most important thing.
Yes.
And and in my business, it's very difficult to work with people that aren't well adjusted, that didn't
Mhm.
have a good upbringing. And in those cases, they don't usually end well. But your journey started when you were 18 years old, and you were told earlier that you were adopted, and then at 18 you got your some paperwork from your adopted parents, correct?
Correct.
And what was that paperwork?
It was the paperwork. Well, it was my actual adoption certificate. It was also the paperwork from the adoption agency that just kind of told a little bit about my background. There was some redacted information on that document, and it told me that it gave me the age of my birth mother, which she was 15 at the time. It also let me know that I had a brother somewhere out there that was 2 years older than me. And it also let me know that it was my maternal's grandmother's. It was her decision to be that they gave me up for adoption, being that my birth mother was a minor. And little other facts like my birth weight was on there and little details, non-identifying details
Right. So
basically
you
what was on
got
there.
your basic non-identifying information, which
Yes.
everyone has a right to get.
Yes.
But you didn't get health history, did you?
No.
And that's interesting. This was 1975, right?
Yes.
Well, in today's times, that's mandatory.
Mm.
Anytime someone's adopted in this country, you have to provide your health history. It's mandatory. And even after 1975 for a certain period, mental health history wasn't provided. Now it's provided. And
Really?
that's a big factor. So you weren't provided with any of that, were you?
No. No, my mother told me that they had like whatever medical information they had, it was just like it just said that they're healthy. Like that was it.
That's that's too vague
Right.
because everyone has a history of whether it's cancer, whether it's leukemia, whether it's asthma, whether it's even alcoholism.
Right.
These are things you need to know.
Mhm.
So you're 18 years old, you get this information, and I guess you put it on the back burner for a while. At what point did you really start searching? And I must say, listening to your podcast and listening to what you did, you do great research. You're a great investigator.
Yes, I love doing that kind of stuff. So what I ended up doing, I did end up going to Chicago. I was born in Chicago. I was raised in Florida. So I ended up in Chicago, and since I was in the city, I went to the adoption agency, and I told them who I was, and I was looking for post adoptive services, and then they in turn, contacted me, and they did let me know, let me back up. They did let me know that what they would do was reach out to the family to see if they wanted any contact because my adoption was closed. And so when they did reach back out to me, I went back down to the office, and then they let me know that they did in fact reach out to them, and they said no.
Well, I'm going to stop you right there because it's interesting, and a lot of the cases that we have, we don't take that for an answer because a lot of times the adoption agency will tell you that, and they don't even reach out. They just say that, and I don't
I've
know.
often wondered that. That's funny you say that because I have often wondered if they truly reached out or if it was truly a no.
We're talking how many years? You were born in 75, so
I
this
was
is how many years later?
this is about 19 years later. So this was 95, 95.
And who did they reach out to? They don't have resources to.
I you know what? I'll say this. If they did in fact reach out to someone, I suspect it was my maternal grandmother. But
And
that
that,
is totally I don't have any concrete evidence.
and that wouldn't be the right person, right?
Um, I feel like maybe it would have been her because my mother was a minor. So I maybe I've made this up in my head, but I feel like on the paperwork it might have been all, my maternal grandmother's information because my
That
mother
could
was a
be.
minor.
And how old was your birth mother at the time?
15,
Very young,
very young.
very young. We those are handled very carefully. So you said that you went to Chicago. They gave that information. Nowadays, you can't even do that. A lot of these places aren't in business. You can't just walk in. It doesn't work that way. And
Mm,
you were fortunate, very fortunate.
really?
Yes, you just most of these places are not in business anymore. They get bought out, records are destroyed.
Yeah, I don't think that is actually in business anymore at this point. But you remember on my podcast, remember I showed the letter that I had received from them and it gave me the person's name and I had a contact.
And it's
So yeah.
interesting. A lot of times, contacts will give you clues. Sometimes they block out in like Sharpie the name of the birth mother, but you can still see part of it. They just do that just because they want to help you. And obviously, there wasn't anything blacked out, was there on the form?
No.
So then you were telling me that you finally got your original birth certificate from Illinois when the law passed that you can get that information in 2011. I remember that very well. You
Yeah.
got a lot of cases from Illinois after that.
Yeah. And so that's what happened with me. The very day that you could send your information in, I dropped it in the mail. And it was about 6 months later that I received my original birth certificate. And there's no information redacted on that. It was filled out very spotty. I did not have a first name on there, it just says baby girl, and then their last name. That is how I received my birth mother's name and verified her age. And that was the first time I saw any information about my birth father. And on the birth certificate, he was 17.
But it didn't have his name.
No.
And you were you just baby girl, whatever her last name was?
Yes.
And birth mothers leave clues on these things. And and sometimes they leave clues that are good enough for you to track them down. But other times you're very lucky because other times birth mothers don't put their real name down. And that's
Mm.
where DNA comes in. And this was before DNA. If you were looking for your birth family today, you'd be able to find them even without the birth certificate. The birth certificate is gold, though.
Yeah. It did have an address, but I learned later that they don't live there and they didn't live there anymore. So I did discover that they were actually on the west side of Chicago. My parents that adopted me were actually on the south side of Chicago.
Well,
So
that's interesting because you just said you didn't have an address. If you didn't have that address, most likely the adoption agency didn't either. So I just think they just didn't really do their due diligence.
no, they did. No, I said they did have an address on the birth certificate. There was an address on the birth certificate.
Right, but you said it was no longer any good, right?
Oh, yeah. No, it was no longer any good. At least by the time I got it in 2011, it was no longer any good. I
Right.
understand what you're saying.
Oh, yeah. And then when did they reach out? What year was
This
that?
was in 95
Oh,
that
okay.
I
Then it
had
could be.
contact.
That's possible. Well, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. Most of those places are really difficult to work with, and it really depends who you get on the phone if you can reach people. And
Yeah.
again, a lot of those places are out of business. But you are very lucky. And then I know that you did more research, and Facebook was a big factor, wasn't it?
Social media, Facebook.
So how did
That's
that work out?
so I my birth last name is not a common last name. And so I just started playing with Facebook and putting first it was her name. And I was putting that in different ways and I really wasn't coming up with anything. And then I just put in the last name all by itself and just started scrolling. And then that is when I saw a picture, which I now know was my brother. And it was because I said, oh my God, this person kind of looks like me. And I asked my husband, I'm like, what do you think? And he said, yes. Then I went digging on his page and saw that we had a mutual friend. And it so happened to be my cousin who lived in Chicago at the time, who was on my adoptive father's side of the family. So I reached out to him and I was like, do you know this guy? And I explained to him what I was doing. And I said, please reach out to him and ask him if his mother's name is such and such. And he did that for me and came back the very next day and was like, he said it is. And that's how I found him. And then I reached out and my brother didn't know I existed because I'm younger. And so, of course, I was never talked about. Once I was gone, I was gone.
Right. So at any point did he think it was a scam that you were trying to pull one over on him?
No. And I've asked him why was he so open? And, he just basically, he just had enough discernment to know, this person's showing up. I had our mother's name. And if now that I've met that side of the family, I look just like that side of the family. I don't know if you saw the episode with myself and my brother, but um
I watched the beginning of it, and you guys have the same smile, the same demeanor, everything. You're just very happy.
yeah. And so
He's a
um
pastor, right?
he is. He is. And it just kind of took off. But my husband said something interesting about that. It was almost like I had to find the layer underneath to get in because I feel like, if in fact they had reached out to my birth mother or my birth grandmother, they might have still said no. And so because my brother was so open, he's the one that, kind of let me in, if you will. And once I was in, I was in. And I didn't meet my birth mother until a year later because she is no longer in Illinois. She's actually in Alabama, which I found out, and had been in Alabama for the past 20 years.
And is that where she's from, or how did she wind up there?
She just moved there. She was married at one time, and it took her to Alabama, and that's just where she remained.
And I know that you reconnected with her, and you've met her, correct?
Yes.
And is she married now, or
Is she married? Is that what you asked?
right?
No.
And when you first spoke with her, how receptive was she?
She was receptive. I think she was a little shocked um, because, like one of my older cousins that did know I existed,
Mm.
she was like, she said, "Girl, you was never supposed to show back up, but I'm so glad you're here." And I think it was just shocked. Everyone always is like, "This is like a Lifetime movie,"
Wow.
and our relationship has been, I would say, it's very different than that of me and my brothers. Um, I just think it's hard for her.
Well, she was 15. That's very young, and a, a lot of times they put that out of their mind. This is many years later,
Right,
and it's out of sight, out of mind. It's never going to rehash. You just forget about it.
right.
So I don't know what kind of memory she had about the relationship with your birth father. And I do remember that you and your brother are full siblings, correct?
We are.
That's unusual.
We are full siblings. Yes.
Wow, that's awesome. And he is 2 years.
Older than me.
So
So
she was 15 when she had you. You said that
yes.
means she was 13 when she had him.
Yes.
Okay, and it's with the same guy,
Yes.
obviously. And Were they neighbors? Were they family friends? What were
From
you told?
my now this came from my older cousin. They were neighborhood. It was in the neighborhood. They were neighbors.
That's usually the case. Now, this was 1975.
Hmm.
How long did he remain in that area?
My brother actually has very vague memories of him coming around when he was younger. Um, but that didn't go on for years and years.
But he doesn't remember his name at all?
Oh, we have his name.
Oh, you do?
Yes.
And you've not done anything to track him down?
I've done a little bit of digging. His name, unlike their name, is super common. And so I'm just like, oh, I'd be digging for days. I don't think it would be as easy.
Actually, not. Honestly, I mean, if it's like Gary Williams, I'm just making that up.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
a very common name. Johnny Williams, Williams Smith, common names. But even though it's common, we know exactly where she lived at the time. We know exactly how old he was. They probably went to the same school. So you can narrow it down to 3 or 4 people, believe it or not.
Oh, wow.
So you haven't taken a DNA test either, right?
No, I have not. I've always wanted to, but I've not.
So do you have a desire to find his family? Because you might have siblings that look just like you from that side of the family.
I very well may because they were very young. So, yes, it is my desire to find that side as well.
And since you've been so gracious to do this podcast, I tell you, I would love to help you find him and his family pro bono.
Are you serious?
I'm very serious.
Wow.
This is what we do. And your story is very compelling. I mean, people hire us daily, and some of these cases take forever to solve. And our service it's costly, but not as expensive as other companies like for example, Ancestry Pro genealogists. They charge $5,000 plus, and they don't do what we do. We will actually find that family, reach out, and put you together with them if at all possible. And I want to do that for you. I
Oh
was
my
going to
God.
surprise you later on. We're going to go up probably 5-10 more minutes, but I just wanted to let you know that I would love to help you do this.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Yes.
Okay. And I don't know how your birth mother would feel about that because it could bring up a sore subject. 13 years old. I mean, the good thing was that he was her age. Is that correct? We
Yeah.
hope.
And actually she was almost for me, she was almost 16 because I was born in March and her birthday is in May. So she was just shy of 16 and he was 17. So there wasn't that much age difference.
Oh, okay. So there's nothing illegal about that. If he was an
No,
adult, we'd have a problem.
no.
And we have that. And we have had clients that wanted to find their birth father when it was technically a sexual assault. And in some states, you can still go after them
Wow.
criminally.
Yeah, no,
But
that's not the
we
case.
don't want to touch that. But I
Yeah,
mean, no,
no,
it's
they're
like
kids.
as long as it was a consensual relationship, they did have 2 kids, they did have a consensual relationship, so that's good. But she was she even 12 when she had your brother? I mean, when she conceived your brother?
She was 12. So I'm thinking about when his birthday is.
And that's in
Um,
most cases that's the earliest you
no,
can.
no, no. She was 13. She had to be 13 because she was just shy of 14 when she had him.
And then she must have conceived you pretty quickly after
Pretty
that.
quickly after.
Okay.
She has even shared, because like I told you, I do know my birth father's name, and she has even shared with me what she wanted to name me, and it was basically a female version of his name.
Well, so by the way, if you wanted to have anonymity and take a DNA test, what clients sometimes do, and I tell them to do this if they don't want it out there, put your birth name down or the name you think your birth mother would have given you as your name for ancestry. You can do that
Okay. Okay.
if you want to do that. I mean,
Okay.
because that way a relative out there would see that name and say, oh, this is a relative, not some random person.
Right.
It does work. That's a little trick that we tell people. Also,
Okay.
you can also delete your DNA after we solve the case, but that's no
Gotcha.
fun.
I
Go ahead.
wow. I am really speechless because it's something I've desired to do, but I when I saw how common his name was, and I just know how kind of fairly easy it was for me to find my maternal side, I was like, I'm gonna need some help with this one.
So, on a more serious note, like I said before, you are well adjusted. You had a great life. A
I
lot of
did.
people just never get closure from looking for their birth parents, their adoption. Even when they find their birth family, they still don't have closure. What makes you different than anyone else out there who was adopted?
Mm, I don't know. Oh, different. Um, like you said, I had amazing parents. I had a wonderful upbringing. Um, I don't know. Maybe a difference. I had the support of my parents when I started this journey. Maybe that helped. I have heard of people having to suppress this, even the desire, because the adoptive parents are not on board. And I know that that is hard. I didn't go through that. My parents were so supportive and still are. And maybe that's the difference. I don't
And
know.
how? What's the age difference? Were they in their 20s when they adopted you? How? What's
Yes. Yeah,
okay?
they
It's
are
not like
old.
they were much older though. Then,
Yes.
like we had cases where adopted parents were even older in their 40s, even.
No, they
And
weren't that old. No,
exactly,
they were younger,
and
but
then they died.
definitely older, definitely older than my birth mother.
Right, and then they die young, and then that begins the search for their birth family. But you, like I said, you're very, very fortunate, and it looks like you've had a great career. You have a great family,
I
and
do.
and your brother lives in Chicago, and he's a
Yeah,
pastor. How
he
often do you
is.
see him?
I'm sorry, can you say
How
that
often do you
last
talk
question?
to him or see him?
Oh, I actually just saw him in January. He was actually down here. Our younger brother actually lives here as well. And so I I talk to them pretty regularly. I don't get to see them as much because they're in Chicago, but we communicate pretty regularly.
So you were born in Chicago.
Mhm.
You were adopted out of Illinois, and your adopted parents, did they live in Illinois at that time?
Yes.
What made them move to Florida?
They told me that they decided that they didn't want to raise a family in Chicago. And my mother's family, while they are not from my parents are from Arkansas. And so, but my mother's parents and siblings had began to migrate down here. And so they did the same and came down here.
And I'm sure you believe that if you were raised in Chicago, your life would be very different.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm originally from Chicago. I know Chicago. So what part of Chicago was that?
They were on the south side. They always tell me, oh, I've seen it. Their very first house was on Loomis Avenue.
How far south is that?
Now that I cannot tell you.
The city's laid
I've
out pretty well as
I've
far as
seen it,
numbers.
but I've been down there a few times because we'll go by and my parents will be like, "That's our first house right there, and it's still standing."
It's a very rough city. What you hear about it is true. It's a very rough city, and it wasn't as rough when I was there in the 1970s.
Oh,
and I was
okay,
and I was in high school when you were born.
I was born.
Yeah, and I live in LA, so it's we have our bad areas,
Mm,
but I believe Chicago is probably worse. It's unfortunate. It's a beautiful city,
it is a beautiful
but
city.
you live in the Orlando area, right?
I do.
And
I
you
do.
obviously, how old were you when you moved?
9 months.
Oh, so you don't
Been
remember?
here all my
Okay.
life. No, but I've had the opportunity to go back and forth to Chicago over the years because my father's family was still there, so we would go vacation there and stuff.
So, getting back to your birth mother,
Mhm.
what is the first thing you said to her when you met her? It's something like a soundbite that you actually said to her that would instill something in her.
Um, I believe that is one of the first times that I let her know that I was never angry, because I really wasn't angry. And I can't even explain that, because I know a lot of adoptees are angry. Um, because she apologized. And I told her, no, that wasn't necessary. I was never angry. I had a good life. I was just always curious about where I came from.
And she
So
understood that, right?
she did understand that, but I think maybe she and my grandmother kind of carried that I was somewhere angry and mad at them, and that in fact was not the case.
And your grandmother passed when?
In 2019.
So you did meet her.
Uh-huh. And I had the opportunity to tell her the same thing.
You don't know if she was the one who was contacted from the adoption agency.
I don't know. I never brought that up.
There
I
you go.
never
Yeah,
asked.
there's no reason for that. So before we go, I just want you to pitch your podcast that I really enjoy watching, and why you even started it. What made you start that podcast?
Yeah, so I wanted to tell my story. It's something that people have always said, you need to write a book or something. And when I thought about it, I said, you know what? I'm going to do it in the form of a podcast. And so when I began to tell my story, naturally, I started telling other stories. And so that's what it has evolved into. When I get to speak to different adoptees, birth parents, adoptive parents, foster parents, like all these stories are amazing, and everybody has a different story. And so it's been a great ride so far. And I thank you so much for listening. So check out the Adoption Journey podcast on all platforms where you listen to your podcast.
Excellent. And I know it's easy to find on YouTube. It's easy to find on Instagram. And I will share this when I post this. I will share all your information. And again, Tarcia, thank you so much for being here.
Thank
And
you.
again, good luck with all this. And we'll be in touch soon.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Bye bye.
Bye.